Hello, friend. The day has come. Welcome to episode number 31 of my 31-day challenge, where every single day I've been answering your questions about creating a career or a business that you love. And in today's episode, the final episode of my July 31-day challenge, I'm answering the question, what is the process? Break down the process of making a VR project. So we're going out on a super technical one. Thought you'd enjoy that. If you've got questions or subjects for me to talk about in future podcast episodes, you can reach out to me at AlexMakesVR on Instagram and Twitter. If you've got a longer thing you want to send me, or maybe you just want to tell me about what's going on in your business or career, anything I can help you with, send me an email, alexmakesvr@gmail.com. Every single day, I'm still going to be sending out a newsletter, giving you the inside scoop on business and creative tips about working in VR. You can sign up to that newsletter at alexmakesvr.com. So the day has come, episode 31 of 31. Before I dive into answering this question, I just wanted to take a second again to really thank everyone for listening. Thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. I love that I've been accompanying you on your walks or your morning routine, or maybe in the shower, you saucy devil, washing up, whatever it's been. I am honoured that you've taken the time out of your day to listen to me ramble about VR business. And I hope that you've had a lot of value from it. And as I said in the last episode, I am going to continue doing the daily podcast for as long as I can until I burn out horribly, in which you'll know about. In future episodes, starting tomorrow, I'm going to start to just talk about like a bit more kind of like random stuff. I'm not necessarily going to be answering a question every single episode. Maybe I'll be talking about something that I'm just curious about or interested in. Maybe it'll be something that I'm learning about. Maybe we'll have some like episodes that are about me talking about my original project and where I'm at with bad news. For those of you who haven't heard the announcement, got announced a couple of days ago that I've been commissioned by the BFI network to make the first VR drama that the fund has commissioned, which is very, very exciting. Lots of pressure. It's an original VR drama which uses voice interactivity to drive the narrative. So super excited about that. But it's so early days. I've not even fully finished the script yet. So maybe I'll talk about that in future episodes, like maybe giving you like an insight into my process of creating that. Come on the journey with me, help me shape the project. That would be super cool. If there is any subject that you want me to talk about though, please do get in touch, because I absolutely want this to still be very valuable for you, and I will be definitely paying attention to your feedback and what it is that you want me to talk about. So again, I just wanted to thank you so much for listening the past 31 days. And I hope that we can continue to dive into some of these interesting topics about VR and business and marketing and life and motivation and all the stuff that makes us these wonderful humans that thought it was a good idea to pursue a career in virtual reality. Okay, now into the meat of the episode then. So what is the process of making a VR project? Give us the skinny, Alex. Break it down for us. Give us the blow by blow of how you go about creating a VR piece, start to finish. Okay, so you've got an idea, right? And you think, do you know what? Do you know what I want in my life? Lots of pain. I really want to make this in the most difficult way possible, because the truth is that this idea is so unique to virtual reality, and I'm so convinced that this is the only medium that I can tell this story through, that I'm going to put myself through that pain of making it in this way. So you've got an idea. You've checked yourself as to whether or not it definitely has to be made in VR, because if there's any other way, any cheaper way to make something that will probably reach 20,000 times the audience that you will do in VR, then you've checked yourself, you've decided that it's set, I'm making this VR piece, I'm so passionate about it. So where do you go from there? Number one is not what you think I'm going to say. a lot of you who already work in VR think I'm going to talk about pre-production, but I'm not. The first thing you need to consider is your distribution strategy. I've talked about this in a different episode about distribution. This is the number one thing you need to consider in the process of making your VR project. The distribution of your VR project will totally change the way that you creatively approach a project. So, when I'm talking about distribution, I'm talking about, is it a 360 piece that's going to end up on Facebook or YouTube? Is it a VR piece that's going to end up on a HTC Vive Pro as part of a wider art installation? Is it a VR piece that I want loads of people to experience together, sat side by side, so that when they take the headset off, they can have a conversation? Is it a VR piece that is actually made for someone to view at home, but I want them to see it in a 6 Degrees of Freedom headset? I want them to see it in a Quest. You have to think about who the audience is that you're going to be targeting with the piece. Like, who is the kind of person that is going to kind of like be seeing this piece, and how are they going to experience it? Because that will totally change the creative decisions. And in those considerations, although lots of people think that, oh, if you're an artist and you've got an idea, you should just like be bold and stick to your artist vision and not go back on it, not change it for anything. It's all or nothing, baby. But the reality is, no. That's the opposite of what you want to do. What you want to do is have this idea, but then keep it malleable and be able to shape it around what the technology and what the audience capacity will allow. Okay, so for example, with Bad News, my latest project, I'm in that stage where I've got the idea, the script is starting to shape up. I've already got like about 3 versions of the script, but now we're starting to consider distribution. We're starting to consider who is the most important audience for this piece. And the truth is, because it's funded by the BFI network, the most important audience is a cinema audience. It has to reach a mass, it has to have mainstream appeal, and it has to reach a mass cinema, not a mass cinema audience, but it has to reach a cinema audience, not specifically anyway, a arts venue audience. It is not designed to be a piece of VR that is seen by one person in a confined installation art space, okay? This is a piece where ideally, in an ideal world, 20 to 30 people at a time will sit in a headset and all kind of experience the same thing. Now, I've very stupidly chosen to make it voice interactive because I believe that will really engage people in VR and really see the uniqueness of it, the power of stepping into the character's shoes and actually having to like speak parts of the script. You become an actor in the film, essentially. That's the selling point. But what I have to consider now is how are we going to approach the creative process with the fact in mind that we want to reach a slightly broader audience than just a kind of like 1 or 2 people at a time, okay? Given that they will have to be speaking out loud, they will have to be kind of commanding the piece. So all of a sudden that changes how we go about creative. Not only that, but it also changes the kind of space that we will need. For example, for that audience, for a broad cinema kind of like audience to have like a broad appeal, what I don't want to do is make it a stand-up 6 Degrees of Freedom experience. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I might end up doing a version that is that if I feel like there is a version that will most likely get more profile if it is developed in that way. But the main output for this film, the main way I'm going to be creating it, is to be sat down in a cinema chair or in like not a Peloton, that's an exercise bike, a positron chair, whatever it might be, group of people together being able to experience it, but they'll have to have some kind of, distance between them because they will need to kind of interact with it. It will need to pick up on their microphone, that kind of thing. So those are creative decisions that I'm now having to make and to feed back into the script. So hugely important. So think about your audience, think about your distribution channels first. Then you can go into pre-production, right? Then you can start to look at, okay, well, what's this script going to look like? Now, for me, obviously, I've just told you that I've done this the opposite way around. I wrote the script first, but that's only because in order to get the funding in the first place, I had to have a bit of a proof of concept, and I didn't want to actually create a prototype piece. I thought I could paint a better picture of what my vision for the project was by writing a script, because I feel like the power of words I've always thought that VR is very much akin to reading. It's way more like reading than any other. Well, I think it's most akin to dreaming, actually. But whilst you're awake, I guess reading is like the most similar experience, because you can read words on a page and your brain creates the world, right? Creates the universe around it. And I thought that was kind of like the best way to do that, is to give people, and especially the folks over at the BFI, give it its best chance at getting funded. Starting with that big picture idea of what it was. But now I'm kind of retroactively changing the script to fit the distribution plan, right? So you write your script, or if it's a documentary piece, you start to like look for contributors or like people that are going to be a part of it. You start to piece together what you think the story might be. During that process, especially if you're working in 360, this is when you start to need to make like the technical considerations. So for me, for example, in my script, I've got scenes that are happening in things like a coffee shop or in a bookshop. Now, the reason I've chosen those locations is because I happen to know people that manage or work in those environments. So I know that I can get access to those locations. So I'm not just like pie in the sky, just thinking, I'm just going to have an infinite budget and I'll just be able to hire these places. No, I already know that I have access to those places. I have access to those people. When I'm writing the script, especially as an independent creator, as much as I always will reach out to high profile talent and I'd love to have them involved, I always need to know that I can go to people that I can rely on, maybe actors that I've worked with before, or kind of building roles that for me seem like, okay, worst comes to worst, if I have a really minimal budget and I have to like pull in kind of friends or like actors, friends who are actors as kind of like their, not their full-time job kind of thing. Like I know that I can always fall back on that. So I write roles and I write locations, especially when I start out with an idea, with that in mind. Like, can I make this piece on my own? If worst comes to worst, if I didn't get all the money I needed, could I still make this project happen? That for me is always front and center. So obviously you're looking at things like, in those locations, what's the lighting like? Obviously, I'm specifically talking about like photorealistic 360 at the moment, but for Game Engine, it's obviously like a slightly different process, but you still want to think about things like, what's the environment like? What's that? And always come back to like, what's that going to be like for the audience? When someone puts on that headset, what's the experience you want them to have? What emotionally do you want to kind of do to them? What journey do you want to take them on when they're in that headset? What do you want them to think when they take it off? And every creative decision should kind of draw back to that question. So you started to think about the technical piece. You've started to think about how much crew do I need for this realistically? When I'm creating a shot like this, how practical is that? How long might that take? This is when you start to get your producer cap on. This is when you start to think about the practicalities of like, okay, I've got a 3-day shoot. So if I've got a 3-day shoot, I've got budget for X amount of crew, X amount of like equipment. If we're talking 360, I probably shouldn't have this big fancy swirling drone shot that's going to take like half the day to shoot, or a one shot that with like 5 pages of dialogue, which is going to take the actors about 20 takes to get. You know, like, well, maybe I'll keep the scenes a bit shorter. Maybe I'll keep the scenes a bit shorter, but change location more often, because A, that's less taxing for the actors, because remember, very difficult to edit within a 360 scene. So really you need actors that, if you're going to use actors that have like a theatre background. What else might you think about? You might think about if you're going to be creating in a game engine like Unity or Unreal, maybe you need to think about, okay, well, now I've decided that this is going out on a quest. Now I need to think about what the style of this animation or this CG is going to look like, given the fact that I've only got a certain amount of, I think they call them poly counts or something like that. Like the quest itself can only handle this level of graphics. So I need to now think of a very clever stylized way of getting across the atmosphere that I want, whilst also being able to port to this headset. So all of those technical considerations. Do as much of the work in pre-production as you possibly can, because I promise you're going to save yourself such a massive headache if you think through all of the logistics, all of the practical implications of your creative decisions in pre-production. Once you've done that, obviously you move on to production. And again, for 360, that's when you're like showing up and you're executing. What are the key things to think about? Well, you want to think about how those actors are moving within that space. We talked about this in the episode about directing 360, but the idea of directing audience attention. You're using choreography, you're using sound, you're using space, you're using editing. You know, you're kind of editing obviously comes in post-production, but you're using and you're maximizing the space, the location that you've got. If you're doing movement, are you testing and playing back in a headset to make sure that it's smooth, to make sure that it doesn't make the average person feel sick? Are you making sure that the tripod height for your 360 camera is the same every single shot, if that's the intention, to make sure that you don't keep changing the height and making people feel like a bit vertigo? I'll never forget one of the first projects that I made where I wasn't operating the camera, and we changed I didn't even really notice, but we were in a really tight location in one of the scenes, and we had to like change the tripod to be slightly higher. And every time I've shown that piece to people, they have that kind of vertigo reaction of like, oh, like, oh, I've moved. And literally the tripod was maybe like 2 centimeters higher than it was in the previous shots. But that right there, like even just that shows you just how sensitive first-time VR users are. Well, that was another thing that I should have brought up in distribution, really, is like thinking about your audience. Like, is this a first-time VR audience? If they are, then you really need to like think about that, because you've got I feel super passionate about the fact that if you are giving someone their first VR experience, no pressure, but you're basically holding in your hand, for now, their entire opinion on a whole industry is in your hand. So if you betray their trust, if you show them a piece that makes them feel sick, if you, I don't know, betray their trust by like not telling them that you're putting them in a horror thing and then putting them in a horror thing and making them actually crap their pants, like all of these things you need to consider. I know it's funny to watch GIFs of like people shitting themselves, like when clowns jump out at them or whatever, but you really need to think. And obviously, like if you've prepared them for that, if they've asked to go on a roller coaster or do a horror game or whatever it might be, then of course that's one thing. But just really think about that. Just think about the fact that every time you put someone new in a VR headset, your aim as someone who works in this industry is to try and get them to fall in love with the medium, to try and like make them feel comfortable, to get them to a point where they do want to do more VR or invest in their own VR kit maybe. Like the fate of our industry depends on that, depends on what quality of experience someone has the first time they put on a VR headset. So really take that responsibility seriously, please. I beg you. So again, how does that feed into creative? So things like maybe you don't want to put moving shots in your piece if it's a first-time VR audience, because that can make someone feel very, very sick. Maybe you don't want to have like jarring kind of action. Again, like first time, it's really difficult because first time VR experiences are very, very different to experiences for people that have been using VR for years. And this is one of the problems with creating VR in general, because there's so many fragments of audiences. And this is why you really need to consider your audience right up top. And hence my dilemma, basically, about like, you know, the kind of audience that would enjoy Bad News, my new VR piece, as a first-time audience is going to be a little bit different to the way that I create the piece if I want it to premiere at like a decent film festival, which is sad to say, but that's because the person in charge of curating the festivals is someone that's used a lot of VR, so they are part of the audience that isn't necessarily as impressed by that first simple 360 experience that maybe we all had when we first got into VR, and it made us kind of like wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and super excited to get in. So anyway, so production, we've touched on that, but loads of things to consider in production. If you're starting out, my biggest recommendation is just go out and test. You'll soon find all of the pitfalls with production, and same with game design. You'll soon find out what gives you the headaches and what are things that you need to consider ahead of time next. And if you want a whole episode on that, and I'm thinking about doing like a whole series in future where every single day of a week I break down a different part of the production process, so let me know if that would be interesting. And then obviously you go into post-production, and I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty other than, you know, the deal. Like, editing is just as much a part of the directing of VR as anything. So make sure that you're thinking about where those kind of points of interest are in your piece. Are they lining up so that if someone's looking at a different point of interest when you cut to the next scene, that point lines up? Or are you intentionally wanting them to kind of discover the piece? How are you using sound? Make sure that you're color grading things really nicely. I remember when I first started editing 360 stuff, and I didn't realize, even though it looked really high contrast and saturated on my computer, when I kind of ported that to a headset, it looked really washed out and grey and gross. And I was like, oh God, I need to like double the saturation on it and sharpen. Like, again, it's been a while since I've used some of the consumer cameras, and the more the higher end production cameras like the Titan and things like that, they do tend to have quite a good amount of sharpening on the image anyway. But just test in your headset. Again, make sure that you're viewing the content back in the way that your audience will be seeing it. That really pisses me off when, okay, so slight rant. Robert Rodriguez, incredible independent filmmaker, like always pushing the boundaries, very ahead of his time, always looking to do new things. So he created I don't think it was a 180 piece, I think it was like a 220 or something. It was basically, it wasn't a full 360. It was shot kind of like a 180, but it was a bit wider field of view. If you've not seen it, well, I will recommend you go watch it. But if you can watch like if you can watch a screen capture of it on a 2D device, I would probably recommend that, just because, I mean, I swear at the best of times, but let me tell you, this film, which is called The Limit VR, it's a real eye fucking, oh, Jesus Christ. It's like having skewers poked in your eyes and then like them wobbling your eyes about with a skewer, basically because Robert Rodriguez, according to interviews that I've watched with him about that piece, didn't watch it back himself in a VR headset during the editing process. He would send cuts to his son, who had a VR headset to watch, but his son was a VR gamer. So as we know, the more experienced you are with VR, the higher tolerance you have to things like nausea. I was quite well versed with VR. I'd watched VR for a long time before I watched that piece. But I had to take off the headset like 3 different times because my eyes felt strained. I felt sick. And I really wanted to carry on watching it because I'd heard so much hype around it. And I do really love Robert Rodriguez as a filmmaker. So I was like, oh, God, I must persevere. But, ooh, yeah, it was an eye fucking. Jesus Christ. But it's an interesting case study in the fact that you should always be looking at your project in the way that your audience is going to consume it. I went through a little period of thinking, oh, I can kind of guess what something looks like in a headset because I've been doing 360 for a while now. And And that is true. I can kind of tell from a shot looking at it on a 2D screen. I can kind of tell what that's going to feel like in a headset just from experience. But I still always make sure that I look back in a headset because there's always something that you've missed. I remember once actually putting out a project. It was a real rush job, and I'd forgotten that we needed to paint out some of the kit that I'd put on a bench nearby and totally forgotten about. And I delivered the piece to the client, and they were like, "There's like a kit bag on the bench in this shot. Is that meant to be there?" And I was like, "Oh, no, actually, this is a draft. Let's don't worry about that. That'll be painted out in the next version." And then basically, I had to quickly like get my post-production artist and comp person to paint that out because I was like, whoops. And it's only because it looks so small on a 2D flat screen when you like see the stretched out 360 image. But then when I looked at it in a headset, it's obviously much closer because that is literally the nature of 360. And that's the other thing. When you're on set, that's a big thing. I know I'm jumping around here, but in production, make sure, again, same story, make sure that you're viewing. It's really hard, I know, at the moment, because 360 cameras don't automatically let you preview in a VR headset. But you have to look back at your rushes on set before you wrap any scene, because it would be like trying to judge whether a 360 shoot is successful based on just like the preview that you get on an iPad or a phone from the camera would be the equivalent of a movie director not looking at their monitor, but just looking at the actors in the shot and just thinking, well, the camera's kind of set up in the right place, I'm sure, and that lens looks vaguely right, so, and the actors were really good, so I'm sure that we've captured it. Like, we have to look back at the rushes in the way that our audience is going to see them. We have to be able to look back at the full 360 in a headset. And I know it's annoying. I know it's painful to have to on set film the scene, then take that file, put it on a headset, preview in a headset, change anything that needs to be changed in the scene, and do that all over again until you're happy with it. I know that's annoying. I know it can be very tempting to not do it, but please, it will save you so much headache and heartache when you kind of get into the edit and you're like, oh crap, like I didn't notice that. So I would highly recommend doing that. So once post-production's done, then obviously you distribute. You decide whether you're going to, again, you would have already decided this up front, but maybe you want to send it out to festivals first. Firstly, maybe you send it out to a few people that within your circle to get some feedback, to get some ideas on what needs to chop and change, anything that you need to change, anything that they kind of highlight as like, oh, maybe you want to think about this, or this scene didn't quite work for me, or oh, that edit was a little bit off, maybe you should do this. So maybe send it to people that you trust within who kind of work in VR, or maybe like I really enjoy showing it to my parents. I always think that my parents are like so removed from the tech world, and they don't spend any time in a VR headset other than when I shove them in one. So I always think that their first reaction is always really telling of what the average kind of consumer would think if they saw the piece. So have like a phase where you're testing it, see what works, see what doesn't. Ideally, in an ideal world, if we all had unlimited budget, we would be able to do like little test scenes before we went into production, but that's not always possible. So make the use of that during editing, to make sure that flows nicely, to see what the kind of reaction will be from audiences, anything that needs to be cut out, anything that needs to be added in, that kind of thing. Then you send it out to festivals. I would always recommend, obviously this is completely dependent on what you want to do with your piece, but I would recommend you send it to festivals just to try and get it a premiere, try and get it some laurels, try and get it some profile before you put it out into the world. Basically, this is the area where you're starting to market the piece, right? So if you can, get in touch with the creators. I say curators, not creators, because you are the creator. if you can, like if you've got some way of kind of like getting to them personally, it might be best to sound them out, like because often the horrible truth is for festivals is, yes, they want to program the best work, but also because of the way VR is, they will have to be programming based on the space that they've got available, based on the hardware they've got to show. They'll only be able to take a select number of pieces. They'll already have an idea of the kind of slots that they're looking to fill, and they might even have themes in their head around things that they want to program. So they might be looking for like pieces that fit into that. So if you can, maybe have a conversation with that. They won't always be forthcoming. They might say you just have to apply and see. But you know, if you don't get into a festival, don't be disheartened, because having been on the receiving end of that, I know sometimes it literally comes down to the fact that they don't have enough headsets to program all of the things they want to, and the place where yours could have sat, there's already another piece that they've already confirmed, or maybe they can't get a sponsorship deal to get enough headsets to run a 360 cinema, so they're not focusing on 360, or, you know, there's all sorts of different like kind of things going on in the background. And generally speaking, the VR sections of film festivals are very, 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 very underfunded. Even if they are the biggest festivals in the world, just think, like, when someone needs to like view thousands of film submissions, yes, that's painful and time consuming, but there is a very simple way to do that. Like, literally someone could do that on their phone if they wanted to. Like, I could literally review submissions for Sundance by sitting on a train and watching films on my phone. That would actually be quite enjoyable. With VR, it's totally different. And even if there are less submissions, that person has still got to sit in a headset for a long time. And it could come down to something as simple as someone's been in a headset for 3 hours and it's bugging out and the experience isn't working, and it totally tarnishes what someone thinks of your piece. And that's what you're up against. That's the reality that no one talks about in this industry, and I want to be super honest about it. This happened recently on, I was judging for an awards panel recently, and when I was judging, there was a couple of pieces that didn't work technically like properly when I went in. Now, luckily I'm a creator, so I can kind of go, do you know what? I'm not going to penalise them for that, because it's not their fault that the tech didn't work. But that could colour someone's kind of experience with your piece. They might not even be able to get it working. So again, if you're working on more of an app or a game-based piece, for God's sake, make sure that you check again that it actually works on the kind of headset that they're going to be using. And that's the other thing. You might develop for a Quest, and the festival or the person reviewing submissions doesn't have a Quest, they're not going to be programming for the Quest because they've got a sponsorship deal with Vive. Like, honestly, there's so much that goes into these decisions. So it is not just about whether your piece is good enough or not to go into these festivals. But if you can get into a festival, having said all that, having flogged that horse to death, if you can get into a festival, it is good because it does kind of give you profile. It gives you an opportunity to showcase your piece for free, essentially. And it can also be an amazing opportunity to get together with fellow creators, network, also meet some of your audience, get some of that feedback. It's just a general good time. Good vibes only. And then once that's done, you decide on the distribution. Like, you know, are you going to try and put it out on a platform like Amaze VR or Via? Are you going to try and go after like location based? Are you going to put on a pop-up VR cinema? Are you going to package it with speaking? Like, are you going to use it as a springboard to like sell workshops on how to make VR films? So yeah, then you start to think about how you're going to get it into the wider world. Are you going to put it up on Steam or Oculus Store so that everyone that has a VR headset at home can use it? Are you going to run a bit of a marketing campaign? Are you going to do a screen capture of the 360 experience and put it on YouTube so that people without a headset can see it? All of these things that you need to consider. And that, my throat is so dry, I'm going to need to end it there. That concludes a breakdown of the whole process from beginning to end of how to think about making a VR piece. I hope you loved this episode. That's right, loved it, not liked it, loved it. I have so enjoyed this 31 days. I had a last minute script project that I needed to do in between kind of these things that I was kind of not expecting. So it's been really full on. But what struck me as really interesting is that I've just really enjoyed it. Even when I've been quite stressed and had like running a little bit low on sleep, I've really enjoyed doing these episodes. So thank you again so much for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with a new episode. Tomorrow's episode is very different. I'm not answering a question, but I am deep diving into influencer marketing and what we can learn from that in the VR industry. So that's going to be super fun, and it's going to kick off the new season, the August edition of the Alex Makes VR podcast, where I'll be kind of treating the podcast as a little bit more flexible, a little bit more fluid. I'm going to try and show up every single day for you, though, even if it's just a 5-minute episode talking about something wooey or big picture or self-development or motivation or whatever it might be, or whether we're talking in the weeds about this kind of stuff. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please reach out to me. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got subjects you want me to tackle. Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter. If you've got a longer question or context you want to give me, send me an email, alexmakesvr@gmail.com. Every single day I'll be sending out newsletters with insider tips and tricks for creative and business, the creative and business side of VR. So if you want to sign up for that, alexmakesvr.com. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe and follow on the podcast platforms. And do you know what? More importantly than that, tell a mate. I would really, really love that. If you know someone that you think might get value from these podcasts, please share it. Honestly, it makes my world when people like share it in Instagram stories and things. Genuinely tag me in things. I love seeing it. I'm going to be doing a giveaway. I'm just literally in final kind of chats with a potential sponsor to do a giveaway next month of a 360 camera and potentially a VR headset as well. So keep an ear out for that. That'll be in a future episode. But yeah, it would mean the world to me if you shared the podcast. Okay, I've talked for about 35 minutes, so I'm sure you're sick of me. I hope you're having a fabulous day wherever you are in the world, and I will speak to you tomorrow.